if I could just finish on just one last thing, talking about stereotypes in Hollywood and all that. A lot of that, and I've been around 20 years. I think Maz has been around the same time. A lot of it has to do with the fact that Hollywood always needs a bad guy, and Middle Easterners we're the last in line. The Asians got it, the African Americans got it, the Latinos got it, the Russians were the bad guy at one point. And I think Hollywood was kind of like, we've run out of people. The Filipinos can't be bad. The Dutch are really nice. Let's go for the Middle Eastern demographic. And it kind of spun out of control because 10 years ago, when it was starting to erupt, it was happening way before that. A guy named Jack Shaheen wrote a book called Real Bad Arabs, and if he picks apart like 1,200 movies and TV shows and cartoons from like the 50s even, that depicting Middle Easterners, Arabs, and Muslims in a bad light. But it sort of had a renewal stage that we went through about 10 years ago when these movies were coming out, and that's when I first started out as an actor, and that's when I was me personally and selfishly was going to the community and to people and saying, hey, we should stop this because I see something bad about to happen. It's going to get worse, and at least people that I was talking to were like, no, Ahmed, it is not our place. Leave it up to the Jews, And then suddenly it's like, oh shit, we need to do something. So I think it is up to us, and it is all about the independent filmmakers and Boom Gen and writing these books and having a voice as comics and directors and writers.
Shiva, what do you think, just on a practical thing? I know that there was, you hear these news things that come up. I turned out an audition for a movie. It was called Crossing Over. It had a family, an Iranian family in LA, where this one brother, he was a lawyer, by the way, lawyers, who decided to kill his sister because she was sleeping with a Mexican guy, and it was an honor killing. And I read that, I was like, where the hell did they come up with it? And I told my agent, I said, ask this director-writer where he came up with this. And they said, oh, there's an article somewhere. So when you're faced with somebody who goes like, or sometimes things happen in the news, I mean, how do you then, what do we do to counter that, to go, hey, look, my dad is this person, my friends are lawyers, they're these people, they're not these, the aberration is not the norm.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because maybe I shouldn't say this because I think the film was popular. It was the stoning of Soraya, and that was something I could have auditioned for, and I felt wrong about it. But then later, I did the research. Once the film came out, I thought, because stonings in Iran, I think that was one case that happened. It was very rare. I mean, we have our issues, and there's definitely issues with women's rights, but this particular thing seemed like it was just sort of, why did they decide to make this film on this subject? And I did the research and found out that there was a Christian right company that had put up the money, and that it was just sort of like this propaganda film, or I felt it was a propaganda film. But that was exactly sort of along those lines. I mean, I think all we can do is maybe boycott, turn down things, but like Reza said, it comes down to the dollars. So I don't know how much it would help if one or two of us boycott, but the other idea would be to write our own material,
create our own material, produce our own material. My friend Yelda, who's in the audience, her and I found this incredible book that we wanted to, we still will produce, about an Englishman who goes to Iran in 1970s and falls in love with an Iranian girl. And it's like the most beautiful story because it's poetic and it's got all the mythology of Iran. And it was a real struggle for us because I bought the rights to the book right the next day, September 11th happened, and it was just such a disaster because we were like, the day before Brian Grazer wanted the book, the next day it was cold, so we had to sit and wait for years, and then now finally the climate has changed, but it's a beautiful epic story, a love story, and it's sort of like a Dr. Zhivago English patient. So I think, we're going to continue fighting to get this film made, but it's things like that, I guess, just to continue on.
and I go to John on that one. Talk to us about the census. Not just Iranians, but I think also Arabs. Go on. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, there are a number of ways that I think each and every one of us, not in the entertainment industry, who are not lawyers or whatever else, can actually affect change. And one of the things is it starts very simply, and it's sort of a modern bureaucratic state. The only thing worse than being reduced to a number is not being reduced to a number. In other words, not being counted. Now, according to the U.S. Census in 2000, there were only 338,000 Iranians in the entire United States. Okay, that's a dramatic undercount. We probably combined no more than 338,000 people. There are probably more than 338,000 Iranians just in LA County alone. But the fact of the matter is Iranians are tremendously reticent about identifying themselves, certainly on a government form to the U.S. government as to their identity. Understandable. However, in the long term, this dramatically holds back the power of the group because politicians don't take notice to realize who's in their constituency. They don't speak to the Iranian American or Arab American or Middle Eastern American communities because we're not identified. We're sort of whitewashed, as sort of the title of my book says, in the sense that we're lumped into this white category, but not really counted. So you can bet politicians know exactly how many Asian American voters there are in their constituents, or how many Latino voters there are, how many African American voters there are, and they take special interest on those issues. But one of the reasons we largely haven't had a political voice as a community is because we're simply not being counted. So one very simple step is make sure to identify yourself. If you're Arab, identify yourself in that little blank box, Arab American, or Iranian American, or Persian American, or whatever you want, because that is a tremendous, really simple, not very sexy, but very simple, important step in terms of being identified. And then, two other things to add. I mean, Reza brought up the point, of course, of civic, in terms of the wealth of our community not translating into voice. And I think one of the big problems is, Middle Easterners are a tremendously well-educated group as a whole, tremendously socioeconomically advantaged, but they have absolutely no political presence whatsoever. And that's a shocking thing, and in large part it's because of a reluctance to become politically involved. So civic participation is something that I think is incredibly important and can start on the individual level. And I think that's key. And then finally, I would say that simply just being yourself and being identified as Arab American or Iranian American goes a long way in terms of demystifying some of the stereotypes that people face, or that the people endure in our society. One of the things I talk about in my book, for example, is this process of selective racialization. As Middle Easterners, because we're sort of in that ambiguous racial zone, we tend to be selectively racialized. When someone from our group does something good, there's no mention made of their race usually. They're just another ordinary white person. You can mention a whole bunch of famous Middle Easterners who nobody knows is Middle Eastern, from Ralph Nader, Steve Jobs to Andre Agassi. However, when
Steve Jobs is Middle Eastern?
Absolutely, he's of Syrian descent.
Really?
Yep.
You should give us discounts on Apple.
We should write to him.
Steve. Go on.
Absolutely, but no one knows that, right? Instead, people are identified as Middle Eastern when they go and they kill people. That's when someone is identified as Middle Eastern. I'll give you an example. It's funny, just reading the headlines just a few weeks ago, not on this Fort Hood thing, which of course there's a lot to comment on, but on something somewhat more mundane, Andre Agassi, right? Tennis champion came out with this book where he revealed that, among other things, he had a mullet hairpiece, the world's first spiked mullet hairpiece. But among other things, he talked about his terrible father and how his father imprisoned him and forced him to hit a tennis ball, like 10 billion times a day until he became good. Now, in the article that was published by ESPN, by Rick Riley, a pretty prominent sports journalist, he says, the way he mentions this is he says, and of course Andre discusses how his Iranian father imprisoned him and forcibly, and again, it's the selective idea that suddenly Andre now is of Iranian ethnicity because of this transgressive behavior. So what ends up happening is all the good things we do kind of go to the white side. All the bad things we do go to the Middle Eastern side. And so this whole process perpetuates itself through selective racialization. I think being identified as Arab American, Iranian American, and just being normal or doing normal things that don't involve bombs is a very solid first step in terms of making progress.
Maybe there's a sequel, Not Without My Andre.
There you go.